Hey, it's Nate again, and today I'm going to talk about how I write screenplays, and specifically feature screenplays. So, feature length, full movie, 90 to 120 pages. Um, what that process looks like on my end. I have been successful with this. I've won some festivals and I've gotten representation. Some of my scripts are now being produced with name actors, uh, with big budget projects. So I'm going to briefly sort of go over the basics of my process, and maybe you'll get something out of it. There are many ways to do this. This is my way. It really all starts with an inspiring idea. And by inspiring, I mean I call it the lightning bolt. So something that is so exciting and so that you get so passionate about that you have the energy and time it takes to really make it through an entire first draft of a screenplay, and then the years it takes to do rewrites and to build a team and to get a movie made. You have to love it that much. If you don't love it that much, don't do it. Um, so step one, get an idea that you just can't resist, and that can come from anywhere. It could come from a character. It could come from a story you heard, or a feeling that you had, or an experience that you've had. Um, and then there's the process of figuring out the story itself. So you can read every book in the world about how to write a screenplay. And I've read many screenplays that are very well structured and very, grammatically very well structured, and they meet all the marks, but they never make it because they're missing that X factor. They're missing that writer taking that next step into truly going deep into what a meaningful story can be. So the first thing is every story ultimately revolves around one character, the main character. Not two characters, not three characters, but one character is usually the center point of a story. And that character must have a clearly defined central flaw. A lot of amateur screenplays that I read are lacking this, and it's one of the most important things you need to have is you need to make sure that your one main character has a clearly defined central flaw. And the journey, whatever the plot is that brings them on this journey, is really deep down about them either overcoming this central flaw or not. Um, the story is always really about something much deeper than the plot. A lot of amateur screenplays that I've read are very plot centric. It's about the actions that are happening, and that is not really how you write a really good screenplay, no matter what kind of screenplay you're writing, a horror, a comedy, a drama, or whatever. It should have these basic ingredients. Um, with that said, too, a good screenplay I've noticed is really considers all the things that a director and actor will be thinking about. A director's job is to take that screenplay and tell that story as visually as possible, using all the things like camera movement, placement, lighting, sound design, music, pacing. A screenplay should consider those things and sort of create a blueprint for the director to then build from. An actor's job is to come in and hone in on their character and really understand their character at the deepest level possible. And a screenwriter should be thinking about those basic essential things that make up that character and how those things apply for an actor, especially really good actors, to come in and have something to bite into and then further develop and go deeper into. They say you make three movies: the one you write, the one you shoot, and the one you edit. And it's because a good screenplay with the right team will always evolve into a better shoot and then a better final cut because you get other artists involved who help fully realize that initial vision. So those are sort of the basic fundamental things to think about. Usually, a really solid movie a screenplay writer should always be thinking visually too. Things that I see in amateur screenplays are a lot of dialogue, a lot of expository dialogue, a lot of explaining, people thinking about like how to talk about what is going on. Film is a visual medium. One of my first projects in at USC Film School, the graduate film school program, was we had to make a 5-minute movie without any dialogue, and it couldn't be shot in a way where it's like, why aren't they talking? We had we had to tell a story visually, using all the things that I told you a director thinks about, and so that thinking like that will make you a better screenwriter. So whenever I write a screenplay, I'm always thinking about, first of all, how to visually express the themes of each scene in each moment. Also, when you start writing a screenplay, it's good to have the opening image reflect the theme of the whole movie. You can sum up an entire sort of underlying theme of a whole movie in the opening image. And then the closing image of the film is usually the opposite of whatever that opening image was, to sort of reflect how things have changed or not changed. For example, there's a movie called School Ties, about Brendan Fraser plays a Jewish student who goes to I think it's a Catholic school, and he's sort of an outcast. And he's also from a working class family going to a preppy, privileged school. And the opening image of that movie, it literally starts on the smokestacks of the industry of this industrial town, and then you see the houses of the people that live behind this industry, and that's their whole life, is this working class people that work in this factory and live in this town and have sort of this rough and tumble life of hard knocks. And it really sums up the setting of where this main character is coming from. And so that's another thing too, is then you go into the characters themselves. Usually when you meet your main character, you see them do something or you see them in a situation that fully defines who they are and where they're at in life. And ideally, it's something that makes the audience sympathize with them. So like, you have to show the character doing something in a way that you would look at them as a human being. Even if you didn't speak their language, you can watch the film and totally get who they are and what their problem is, and where they're at in life. So you set up that status quo in the beginning sequence. And then, usually in the first sequence, the first 12, 15 pages, they hear something from somebody that sums up the thing they need to learn, right? And they don't get it at first. And then later on, near the end of the movie, they reiterate, or they have fully come to realize what that thing they heard means. By the way, I'm going to link below the 8-sequence method. The 8-sequence method is what I use personally to sort of lay out my screenplay formats. It's a great way to break down the different sequences of a screenplay. So in Act 1, there's 2 sequences. In Act 2, there's 4 sequences. In Act 3, there's maybe 2 more sequences. Another thing too is whether you're writing a tragedy or a drama, you need to create little mini 3-act structures within each sequence. And they should have the highest conflict and the greatest payoffs as you can have. At the end of the day, it's a movie. And the reason people are going to pay to watch this movie, and the reason people are going to put millions of dollars to make this movie, is because it's a ride. There's an experience on screen that's more extreme usually than regular life. You're usually coming in at a point when something is really the most meaningful and the most intense, and that's where the movie exists within that time frame. Sometimes I read screenplays that are just sort of boring? Are they flat? Or they don't go quite as hard as they need to? They don't kick the character when they're down, and they don't bring them up to the highest high and then drop them down to the lowest low. They sort of just ride this boring middle wave that really is sort of like, why does anyone care? This is sort of vanilla in a way. So that's something to think about. Going along with the 8 sequence method, so we talked about like sort of the opening hook, the image, the opening image that sums up the theme of the story that's linked to that main character's central flaw, introducing them through action and less words, them hearing the thing they need to hear they're gonna learn about later on. Then you get to the inciting incident, which is about 12 to 15 pages in. Each page is about a minute long on the screen. And that's when the idea of change is introduced. They hear or learn about something that is the potential for them to then go on a journey later on. And then through that second sequence, they're building up to like the things in their world are coming to a head where they need to they realize they need to make a decision. They need to make some kind of change. Then you get to the end of Act 1, which is about 25 to 30 pages in. And that's when they actually definitively go on a journey. They make a decision that they have a clearly defined goal. There's something that they are going to do that individual person is going to try to achieve. Oftentimes when people are writing, they're not very specific on that. It needs to be specific. It needs to be linked to that character and their journey somehow specifically. Then you get into the second act, which is the hardest act to write because it's where you have to cover the most ground and you really have to flush out the meaning of the story. A lot of people, especially in Hollywood, they have great ideas. Everyone has these great ideas. Everyone has 101 ideas, and really all those ideas is like the very beginning or the very end of a story. The hard part, the difference between an amateur and a professional is the ability to fully realize the story and characters that connect those things in a really meaningful way. So in the second act, in the first in sequences 3 and 4, you really get into what's called the fun and games, where you're building up to that initial climax. You're introducing these other characters. You're sort of showing how these characters are going on that mini 3-act journey to sort of get to where they're trying to be. And then you get to the midpoint. And usually the midpoint in a typical drama is a high point. And usually it's where that character achieves the thing they set out to achieve. And so it's sort of like a mini victory, but then something else is introduced. A greater conflict comes into play. So you hit the middle of the script, and boom, I got what I wanted, maybe I didn't, and now there's something even more challenging, and usually linked directly to that main character's central flaw, something that is going to be even more difficult for them to deal with because of that central flaw of theirs that is introduced. Then you get into the second part of Act 2, which is like sequences 5 and 6. And usually they call it the second act slump, I think. It's because this is where writers usually run out of ideas on how to really keep this train moving and keep that momentum going. And so what happens is usually you can divert to a B story in that sequence following the midpoint. And that B story is usually where you can usually emphasize like a love story or something like that, or secondary characters in the film and sort of their perspective. Again, all of this tying ultimately into that main character and their central journey. And then you start bringing your character to the low point. The low point should hit at the end of Act 2, usually about 70 pages in, maybe 75, 80 pages in. And the low point, usually it's sort of like multiple points that hit, and then you hit the lowest point, which is usually directly linked to that main character's central flaw. And usually it's a bring them to their knees moment. So you can tell a low point in a movie because a good director knows to literally bring that character to their knees. Usually there's lots of shadows, rain. There's like looking down at a character in a ditch, looking down at someone because they're just beaten down. And you bring them to the lowest of low and you beat them when they're down with drama, something crushing for them. Because it's a movie, you gotta bring them all the way down and remember what's their central flaw, what's the thing they really need to learn, what's the thing they really want. Take it away from them and then just beat them. That's a low point. Then you're into Act 3, which is where things are really rolling now. And the beginning part of Act 3 is called the Dark Night of the Soul, and this is sort of where the character is down in the dumps and all is lost. And this is when they really have to dig deep and figure out what it is. They start thinking about the things they learned, they heard in the beginning, that phrase or whatever it was, that thing they saw that they didn't understand. Now they've gone through some stuff, and now they're starting to truly understand what that means. And this is when they're really connecting with that central flaw and how to overcome it or not. And then they decide to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, or they find a way to continue their journey somehow. And this is when things ramp up into the third act, the last sequence, where things are really going, and they're going against the antagonist, and things are at the highest stakes possible. Usually in here too, there's a twist of some kind. Things were not what they seem. A really well written twist can punch the audience in the face and the character. What I've found is writing a good script, you're usually writing from the perspective of that character, and you're trying as much as possible to put the audience into that perspective and to help the audience be the main character in a way and see everything and feel everything through them. I mean, that's the best way to go from my experience, because when the things pay off at the end, and when the low point hits, for example, the audience is so invested in this character because the script and the story has been told, and they've been rooted so deeply in that character's central flaw and journey, that the audience is then there with them and then rooting for them. And when the things work out and the twist comes and things are sort of perspectives are brought into even more focus, the audience is totally there with the main character. So usually that's how the general way I think about it. Again, it's linked to the 8-sequence method. I try to also write in as much tension and conflict as possible. You don't want things to be easy. You want to try to find ways to create as much tension and conflict in every scene. You'll hear too, as a director, you'll be looking at whose scene is it, because not every scene is the main character's scene. Some scenes are the antagonist's scene. Some scenes are the character's love interest scene. Even though the main character might be in that scene, you're seeing things from slightly different perspectives that further enhance the way that main character is going to evolve through their journey. Now, if you're writing a tragedy, you flip everything on its head. So in a traditional 8-sequence structure, you have the midpoint is a high point, the low point is a low point, and the end is usually a high point. But in a drama or in a tragedy, it's the other way around. The midpoint is a low point, the low point is actually a high point, and then the movie ends in a tragedy. So for someone that knows this stuff, when you're watching a movie, I can tell already by halfway through the movie if it's going to end well or not because of how it's structured. The last thing I want you to think about too is all rules are meant to be broken. There are many rules, right? But you can do whatever you want. Quentin Tarantino went wild with Pulp Fiction. And honestly, it's because someone in a position of power gave him a chance. That's a whole different story, but someone saw his talent and they recognized it, and they gave him a chance with his very unusual, unconventional screenplay, Pulp Fiction. And this was based on some of his previous experience and stuff like that. But that just goes to show you that you can break tradition. Just be prepared if you do, that the audience, especially just a general audience member who's used to watching a certain formula, they might not like it at first. They might not recognize what you've done, and they'll just not like it. For those of you who watch my machinima stuff, overclocked is extremely unconventional because it's a living lore. It's constantly going on. So some people watch the feature version of that, and they're looking for a formula that I am not using. So it's okay to break the rules, but in general, that's how I go about writing a screenplay. Hopefully this was helpful. If not, well, keep looking. There's lots of other ways to go about it. I have been very successful using these methods. And my last note I want to leave you with is I can't force myself to write. I can only write when I'm feeling inspired. And sometimes that's only a couple pages. Sometimes that's no pages. Sometimes that's 20 pages in a sitting. But great writing, like anything great, requires the very best of you. And if you don't have that inspiration, if you're not clear about what you're doing, if you're not feeling inspired, you're only going to create crap, and it's going to feel like crap while you're doing it. I can tell you, the things that I've written that have gotten me success flowed out of me and felt really good. But to get there, I had to really figure out the things that I just talked about, and I had to figure out even more deeply what I was trying to say through these things. You can be as clever as you want. You can think you know all these movie tricks and tips, and you've watched a bunch of movies, and you know all these little character traits. At the end of the day, if you can dig deep into yourself and put yourself into something and put some perspective that you've had into something, make it real, resonate with what you're writing, resonate with the characters, no matter what you're doing, horror, drama, comedy, if you can make it real, if you've got something to say in there, just giving some human perspective to something, do it, because that's really what stands out on the page, is when people read it and go, this feels really real. This feels, I'm connecting with this at a human level and feeling something real, instead of reading just a clever written script or an academically sound script. So that, at the end, is probably the most important thing to really consider. But I hope this helps, and stay tuned for more. Thanks.